It's the witch's ghost. She's what we fear the most.
Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost was the second direct-to-video release during the Scooby-Doo revival of the late 1990s, following the acclaimed Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. In this film, the Scooby Gang are invited to visit the New England home of famed horror writer Ben Ravencroft after he helped them thwart a supernatural-themed crime at a museum. Upon their arrival, they discover the author's quaint little town of Oakhaven, Massachusetts has been overrun by tourists attending a local festival centered around an ancestor of the writer, Sarah Ravencroft, a 17th century woman who had been persecuted as a witch. Or rather, a festival centered around Sarah's ghost, which was rumored to be terrorizing the town. The gang meet several members of the community, including the town's mayor, Mr. Corey, Jack the restaurant owner, and McKnight the pharmacist. So you know they're going to be involved somehow. This also marks the first appearance of fan favorite the Hex Girls, a local goth-based rock band scheduled to hold a concert during the festival. The ghost of Sarah Ravencroft makes a few appearances, and the usual Scooby shenanigans occur before it's revealed that it was all a hoax to drum up tourism perpetrated by several of the town's prominent citizens. Called it. While insulted over the crass use of his ancestor's name to generate tourism income, Ben seems more disappointed to learn that Sarah Ravencroft's journal wasn't found when the town accidentally disturbed her grave. The writer had been obsessing over the book during the course of the film, claiming it would prove that she had been innocent of witchcraft. To Ben's delight, Velma is able to determine the actual location of Sarah Ravencroft's grave, and Scooby unearths the journal. However, to the gang's dismay, their host reveals that the journal is actually a spell book, and the famed horror writer was an evil warlock determined to use its power to release his ancestor trapped within, a powerful witch imprisoned by 17th century Wiccans. Okay, something that's always bothered the hell out of me about Witch's Ghost is their use of Wicca, a pagan belief system revolving around spiritual magic and the healing power of nature. As his cover story, Ben claimed Sarah had not been a witch, but instead a Wiccan. The implication being that the two were related but opposite concepts, with witchcraft being evil and Wicca being good, much like how the Force in Star Wars is divided into the dark and light sides. Not only did Ben claim that Sarah had been imprisoned in her spellbook by Wiccans, after her release, the evil witch herself states that only one of Wiccan blood could accomplish that feat. The thing is, Wicca was invented in the 1950s in England, over 3,000 miles away and 200 years after Sarah Ravencroft was banished. Wicca has as much of a connection to 17th century Puritans as a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. Except for maybe Linus. He's a preachy little who would probably be fine with burning witches. Ben terrorizes everyone with his newly emerged magic powers before succeeding in releasing Sarah Ravencroft from the book. Unfortunately for him, as every sorcerer determined to unleash an unspeakably powerful evil entity learns, Ben is unable to control Sarah, who merely mocks his attempts. As revealed earlier, Thorn, one of the Hex Girls, happens to be of Wiccan descent,
Only 116.
and is able to banish Sarah back to the spellbook. Poor Ben was close enough to be seized by the angry witch, who pulls him inside the book with her, presumably to spend eternity listening to her stories about what it was like when she was a teenager and how kids these days don't respect their elders. In case there was any talk of a sequel, a burning branch subsequently falls onto the spellbook, reducing it to ashes and either killing both Ben and Sarah, or sealing them away forever in whatever pocket dimension the book contained. That makes you wonder why the Wiccans who originally imprisoned Sarah didn't do that, since people back then didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with putting torches to use when necessary. The gang then spend the rest of the film enjoying the Hex Girls concert. Overall, Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost is a good follow-up to Zombie Island, and mostly kept to the more mature tone of the previous release. albeit with a much smaller body count. The majority of the Zombie Island principal cast returns for Witch's Ghost, including perennial Fred actor Frank Welker, the late Mary Kay Bergman as Daphne, B.J. Ward as Velma, and Scott Innes as Scooby. Innes also played Shaggy this time around, as Billy West wasn't available due to his commitment to Futurama. As mentioned, not only did the film introduce the Hex Girls, one of which was played by Jane Weedland of the 1980s rock band The Go-Go's, best known for We Got the Beat and Our Lips Are Sealed, but also one of the best Scooby villains, Ben Ravencroft, played by the always amazing Tim Curry.
Ben, that doesn't seem to be a journal at all.
Because it isn't, Velma. It's a spell book.
Witch's Ghost was a small reunion for Weedland and Curry, as they both appeared in the 1980s cult classic Clue, a murder mystery comedy wherein Curry played Wadsworth the butler and Weedland the doomed singing telegram girl. The Scooby franchise has often included real-life guest stars over the years, as well as thinly veiled references to real people, and there's possibly no better example of the latter than the character of Ben Ravencroft. Ravencroft is an obvious Stephen King analog, with the beard and glasses covering the physical resemblance and being a New England-based horror writer covering the rest. The character's resemblance to King is what leads to what I feel is the biggest unanswered question in Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. How will the town of Oakhaven explain the disappearance of Ben Ravencroft? Imagine what would happen in real life if Stephen King, easily one of, if not the most famous contemporary American writer, and definitely the most prolific, suddenly disappeared. Someone, somewhere, would ask questions. If not his fans upon realizing their favorite author suddenly stopped his output, then certainly any number of editors, publishing agents, or booksellers. Even if Ravencroft wasn't as famous in the Scooby universe as Stephen King is in ours, presumably Ben would have had at least one literary agent handling his book contracts who would have been curious to know why the author stopped answering his phone. If nothing else, the agent would knock on Ravencroft's door or contact the local police to perform a welfare check. Imagine that phone call. Ravencroft's agent is on the phone with the local police chief who wasn't present during the climax of the film, while behind him, waving his hands frantically, would be the desperate mayor. No one outside the Scooby Gang, the Hex Girls, Mayor Corey, and Mr. McKnight witnessed the actual events. And by the time anyone started asking questions, both the Scooby Gang and the Hex Girls would already be hundreds of miles away, the former presumably meddling in a ghost-themed real estate swindle or something, while the latter would be sleeping in a car while waiting to open for a Kiss cover band at a county fair. This left the mayor and McKnight holding the bag. Sure, the two of them already had experience concocting an earlier conspiracy, but they clearly weren't that good at it since 4 teenagers and a talking dog were able to demolish it within a few hours. At some point, the mayor and pharmacist's stammered excuses would fail to satisfy the authorities, who would inevitably launch a thorough investigation into Ben Ravencroft's disappearance. It wouldn't take them long to trace the writer's steps and discover the earlier museum scheme, which would of course raise even more questions. At the top of the suspect list would be the same 4 teenagers who were not only involved in the museum crime, but were known to have accompanied the missing Ravencroft to his New England home. Presumably, any number of tourists and townsfolk would be interviewed, each giving evidence of Ravencroft having been seen with the teenagers until the night before the Hex Girls concert, after which he was never seen again. Considering the competence level of the majority of law enforcement in the Scooby universe, where the average sheriff is flummoxed by old men cosplaying as ghosts, it's likely the gang would remain at liberty a long time until an irritated town marshal inevitably had enough of their bullshit and checked to see if they had any outstanding warrants. Learning they're potential suspects in a missing persons case in Massachusetts, the gang would at least be held for questioning. And what would they tell the authorities? Sure, they'd all have the same story, but what cop would believe a supernatural forces caused the disappearance of an evil villain with magic powers? In the end, while always remaining at the top of the suspect list, due to lack of evidence, the gang would eventually be allowed to go on their way, but it's likely their involvement in the disappearance, and presumed murder, of the famous horror writer Ben Ravencroft would follow them throughout the rest of their lives. This would effectively end their career as mystery solvers, because what member of law enforcement would trust the word of a group of suspicious teenagers under a cloud of murder? Maybe that's why Scooby-Doo keeps getting rebooted. The gang need their slate wiped clean every so often in order for them to remain effective crime solvers, and possibly even to keep them out of prison. By the way, Thorn is McKnight's daughter, and here he is running away from the scene, leaving her behind to face an evil warlock. Father of the Year. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. There is more Scooby-Doo related content on my channel, and let's face it, if you're here, you're likely a Scooby fan. I also cover other subjects, so please check them out as well.